Hello, good day, good morning, good evening, depends what part of the planet you're at. And I talk to so many people all over. But anyway, right now you're looking at a Gage Motorsports cylinder head. And this is casted by Max Gregorich. And I've had the opportunity to work with this casting. And then we ended up doing R&D work, and I did some revisions on the intake and exhaust ports, and recommendation on the exhaust and intake ratios. So I think they tested 3 different dynos now. They flow tested it, produced 10 CFM less flow than the top heads out there in the industry, and it made 23% more power. So that's amazing. It proves my old article about it's not about flow, but more about the condition of the mixture as it is before combustion by the spark ignition. Anyway, let's talk about this and then we'll touch on some other aspects of what goes on. Now, if you look at this cylinder head, we'll talk about the intake port first and foremost, okay? And then we'll go to the exhaust on another segment. If you notice, I have a line right here signifying where I want the intake port to be widened. Okay, you can go more, the bigger the cube gets, the bigger the higher the RPM, you can go wider and higher, okay? But for this purpose, this port is not bad. It has a port angle that's pretty high. V8 heads that I'm usually working on starts right here, then dives in to the intake valve. Here, it's got a pretty good high port angle. Now, that being said, if you notice, I made it wider here. First configuration, if I would start a modification, and I'll give you the reason why. I seldom go high up unless the casting has a pretty bad, we call that low port angle. Then I'd go up as much as I could. But the reason I don't, and I elected to go wider, is this. If we look at this casting on the side, this is the port here, the long side port or long side wall, and this is the short side wall. When you raise the port high, okay, what you're doing is the difference between the short side and the long side gets progressively worse, okay? The best port out there is a straight pipe. When the port is straight down, okay, and you're gonna have good flow because there's hardly any dead zones from the short side or anything like that. Or when you have a square port layout or rectangular port, the edges, okay, right here, and right there, and right there, has dead zones. So a round port is perhaps the best, okay? But you cannot really do a round port continually because once the port drops down and takes this turn to the short side, dumping to the cylinder, that's a bend, okay? So when you increase the port height up here, not only do you get close to that, the valve spring pocket and bust through the casting, now you got a intake leak there and perhaps suck in some oil too from the valve springs. So the relationship between the floor and the roof becomes progressively worse the higher you go. Now, when you widen it, okay, this relationship stays intact. It doesn't change. But like I said earlier, when you have a round port, it's good, okay? It goes like this, down to the cylinder. That's the cylinder right there. But once you got a round port or rectangular port, once you take that turn, this area here, once you take that turn on this particular area, you need to go like this, and you need to widen it, kick it out before it dumps to the valve. Okay, the reason you widen this area when you port, you want this area, I'd like to put it there, okay, whatever. Okay, when you widen the port right here, when the flow is coming in at this angle, okay, usually the faster, the higher the RPM, it wants to run in a straight line and hit that long side wall. Okay, now when you widen this port right here, you carve that out, widen it to if it's like flat right now, you turn it to a more circular or oval section there and on the other side. What happens is that when the flow comes in, the air and fuel mixture, the fuel molecules being heavier, has a tough time taking this turn. Okay, and when the flow comes in, when you widen it right here, it slows down, okay, because it sees a larger port. So when it takes that turn right there, it slows down, it's able to navigate that and keep the fuel and air somewhat attached together and go into the cylinders. What you're looking at here, though, it doesn't have an ample short side rib, it's sharp. This is telling me this is a tumble head. Most of its properties is tumble, hardly any swirl. Now, at high RPM, when this thing travels so fast, it hits right here, okay? And when you look at the chamber, right here is the inlet, all the fuel ends up on the long side, or almost all, not all, but almost all. And what happens now, as it discharges, this whole area right here is rich. Okay, if you came in at 12.7, let's say, or 12.5 coming into the inlet, your ratio inside your combustion chamber is not the same anymore. Now you have an overly rich condition here and a lean condition up here. Now, you ever wonder why nitrous engines burn the side of the intake pocket closest to the cylinder wall? Okay, when you melt the piston, it's usually on the intake side because that's the lean situation that's present with the short side discrepancy. Therefore, when it goes in, all the fuel travels forward and slam to the long side. Well, that's why sometimes you see washing out happening right there, okay, on V8 engines, and also on the combustion chamber you'll see a lot of washing out, obviously, on the combustion wall or the China wall. So this is the situation. Now, I will explain to you in a way that it's even more clear. Here's a picture of a Mustang GT. You notice when you're running 65 miles an hour, or for the brave guys out there, 80, 85, and it's raining, your windshield is going 110%, going back and forth, wiping all the water particles or the raindrops from your windshield. But you notice the back of your window? It remains dry. And that's only at 65 miles an hour, or even 80 miles an hour. The port angle here is dry. Not quite as much on a sloping back or like a fast back. But still, when you look at this, I've driven this kind of cars, you'll still see a dry rear window and a very wet front windshield. Granted, you're going this way, right? So, in the port, while it's traveling, this is your rear window. That right there is this. Okay? You're not gonna get the heavy fuel molecules to come down and go into the cylinder. And you have massive separation. Okay, that's why when you look at this right here, lean condition, that's like the back window of your car, and over here it's all wet with fuel. So that's what you have to deal with. Now, here's another situation at hand. When these engines are designed, you see people put in injectors right about here. Okay? And the injector is pointed right at the top of the valve. Nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with that. The injector bung is right here, and it's pointed at the center of the valve. Sounds great when it's static. Again, we're talking about high speed. We're not talking about idle here. We're not really concerned about that because we are indeed a racing forum. So we talk about high speed. At high speed, you got velocity, you got airspeed. The picture I showed you at 65, 70 miles an hour, or maybe 85 miles an hour in the rain, it remains dry on the back windshield, which is this for the port. But this one here, if I remember my notes correctly, there's going 280 miles an hour inside this port to 320 miles an hour on average. So how's that fuel molecule going to stay and travel right here? It's not. It's all going to slam right there. Therefore, the injector angle that's here will still slam right there. Same thing if you have an injector right on top of the upstream of the port or a carburetor venturi. All the fuel air particles are going to go in. It's got weight, it's got speed, it's got velocity, and they travel straight. And nothing happens there. Okay? So if there's a way you can widen it right here, okay, so that the port comes in, okay, you got activity on the center, but once it turns, it wants to slam on the long side wall. So when you open up the floor and these two sides, the air column sees that and sees that area, sees that area of the port, and as soon as it sees that opening, the wider wall here that you kind of cut around here a little bit more rounded, it's flat right here, then rounded here a little bit. The airstream comes in, it's got velocity, sees a wider opening, slows down, and takes the turn for the better. And some of the fuel molecules can adhere and stay with the airstream and have some activity. That basically what happens is that your angle here comes in, and fuel in the air, or fuel still mixed with air, well, at least it's not so much rich on this section here, but right here you have some fuel. Well, it will combust. Okay, because what actually happens is that when it's very lean here, the fuel starts to light up, correct? And then there's a pressure and temperature spike from the expanding gases. You see a pressure spike, a temperature spike, it ignites right here. It auto-ignites, and now you have secondary, and you break the piston, you break the ringland, or you melt that part of the combustion chamber, then you wonder, what happened? Okay, but that's the scenario that's presented here. Now, let me talk about trying to make the port bigger. You don't want to put a bigger port and a bigger cam without compression. The reason why is compression has an element in it that creates a very, very volatile mixture due to the fact that it stirs up the fuel. Now here's 6 to 1. I'm going to use my hand. Here's 6 to 1. Slow motion, okay? And then you try to go fast, that's 6 to 1. Here's 9 to 1. It's somewhat touching, okay? But not really touching. And here's 11 to 1. Here's 14 to 1. Here's 16 to 1. Okay, what's happening here is that when the fuel comes in, and regardless of what condition it is, very rich here or somewhat dispersed, without compression or low compression, there's nothing that comes up and slaps this mixture here and breaks them up and spreads them. Now, the higher the compression, it's closer, it's smaller, it comes in there and slaps it really hard. Like Smokey Nick used to say, to make more power, you gotta slap the piston on top of the head once in a while. He didn't literally say you gotta hit it, but what he was saying is that you bring it so close with compression that the trapped fuel and air particles on the middle gets dispersed, okay? So that's one. Basically, you're slapping it hard and they break them up to small pieces and then they're more combustible. But here's another scenario here. Like I said earlier, this head is more tumble, okay? Here's a tumble situation. Now, when it comes in, it turns this way, okay? So when it's turning that way, tumble, the piston comes up, traps it, and slaps it, and spreads them even more. That's great. But now, there's another element in flow dynamics, is what they call swirl. When it comes in, it wants to turn this way or that way, depends sometimes on the shrouding or how close the combustion chamber is to the valve seat. It tends to swirl. So now your motion is, when you have a low performance cylinder head, the fuel comes in, stays in, and compression comes up close, and it doesn't really excite the fuel air molecules. They just go like this. So they stay dormant and the ignition is weak, or the spark ignition is weak. So you have a little bit of pressure buildup from the chemical interaction that's in the fuel with the air. Now, when you have swirl, or should we say, we'll start with tumble. The flow comes in, it tumbles in, piston comes up. So it tumbles, piston comes up if it's high compression. So you have two motions here. Tumble, and then the piston comes up. It breaks them apart inside this chamber. It's more dispersed. Okay, it's more homogeneous, I think is what they say. And it'll light up easier. But now you bring the third element. You have the tumble that comes in to the valve, to the port. So it comes in there, and then it comes in here and starts to tumble. And then you mix it with swirl. And then you mix it with compression. Comes up and smacks it. So now what you have is the flow come in, starts to tumble, and then you mix it with a little bit of tumble with a little bit of swirl. So you have this, and then the piston comes up and slaps it, and guess what? Now you have a very, very finely dispersed fuel all across. So even though you might have some lean mixture here or whatever, at least some of that thing is going to get blasted by the compression slap. Okay, that's what you call a diffusion. Compression diffusion or compression slap is going to spread the particles all over the place, and boom. Hopefully you get it done, about 15 or 18 degrees after top dead center from ignition point, before top dead center. After top center, should I say, 15 to 18 degrees. So basically, that's what you're looking at. That's why now you're able to see why this small engines can take a lot of carburetors. You ever see some small block Ford or Chevrolets or Chrysler with two Dominators, you go, it's almost impossible. How can they pull that much intake and not fall flat in its face when you drop the clutch or the transfer brake? Because they have a lot of combustible element packed inside that cylinder that's been stirred up real good and it'll light up. If you don't have compression, you don't have the speed of the flame, you don't have heat, because compression is heat, heat is power. By the time you introduce it there, it is not an explosion, it's a fast burn, fast stir with compression, fast stir with swirl and tumble. Without those two elements, without compression, it'll light up. Yeah, it'll light up like a candle, just whiff along. Well, once you've introduced those dynamics, it becomes very, very active. All right, so I think that's as far as we can go for the meantime. Oh, a short story. Years ago, I ran one of the first Yates in drag racing in the late 80s, early 90s, and nobody really was running the Yates for drag racing. And I did the heads because they come in raw, no chamber, no port. So I started doing it, and I purposely avoided the flow bends because I don't know what was going to happen. You know, if I start chasing the numbers, if I was disappointed, I might miss something altogether. So I did the port as best as I could from what it looks like. Now, this car eventually ran 930 at about 100, close to 150 miles an hour. Pretty fast, NA. So when I was done, I lifted the head, took it to the flow bench, and I said 340, 360 is probably the number that's going to produce. That's why I ran that fast. Fast for that time, especially. Well, come to think of it, the heads flow 283, so run it off to 285. Not even close to 340, 360. The reason was the combustion chamber. The mixture that came in because of an effective swirl and tumble, and the compact chamber did not disperse most of the heat. It's so small, 40 cc. The heat is concentrated in a smaller area. It'll push the piston down more effectively than a big combustion chamber, which disperses heat and pressure. Okay, so an effective burn, it only took, I think, 29, 30 degrees of total timing, as opposed to the old engines. They needed like 38 to 44, as 44. This doggone thing is making good power with 30 degrees rounded off, okay? So you got 8 degrees or more of negative torque you got to overwhelm for the piston to go up to top dead center. It doesn't have to fight all that expanding gases while the piston tries to go up to TDC. Okay, so your negative torque losses is cut down quite a bit with 8 degrees less, or as much as maybe 12 to 14, some of the old combination. So bear in mind, the intake port is good, but don't forget the combustion chamber plays a large part in the whole process. So let's stay with that idea. Keep the combustion chamber small, compact. Make the port shape real good. And if you can flow the most amount of air for the least amount of port volume, you're going to have a winner. Okay? Everything that's big is going to flow good. Granted, it's shaped decently, but doesn't mean it's going to produce power, because there's probably a lot of dead areas there, and the mixture is somewhat lazy, and you're going to have a lot of fuel drop off, fuel air separation, so that can happen. All right, so I think we're good, and we'll touch on the exhaust, and I'll come back to some of these finer points, and then we go from there. Okay, so please subscribe, so anytime I come up with something new, you'll be notified, and hopefully we help clear things up. You guys learn, and I learn also from your questions and your comments. It's two ways. I don't have all the answers, and we can all help each other out. Okay? Take care, guys. God bless. Thank you.